Welcome to Apologetics and Prophecy, the official podcast of Calvary Solid Ground, a remnant church in Orangevale, California. I am Pastor Jed, and I will be your host as we bring you Bible studies and updates put through an apologetical and biblical lens to see just how close we are to the return of our Lord. Thank you for joining us today. Maranatha, everyone. So glad that you could join us for this week's edition of Apologetics and Prophecy. And I want to apologize for the last few weeks of there not being a podcast up because I was on a trip to Turkey and Greece on a prophecy cruise with Mondo Gonzalez, Billy Crone, and Brandon Holhouse, and many other people from all over the world, actually. And it was a really blessed time, and we were going to talk about that today. But this is our Monday edition, and we are currently in a study called Build Back Babylon According to the Bible. And as you remember, the last two episodes before the break, we were in Revelation chapter 17, talking about the whore of Babylon and, of course, the beast that she's riding on. And we will get back to that next week. But I thought that it would be important that we would begin with a new review. Basically, some things that I learned on the trip, and I think that it was important for us to share a little bit of what I've learned. And actually, I was surprised to see so much that relates to this study on our trip. And so, but just a new review. If we remember, let's go back. If you remember, our study really starts in Genesis. And in Genesis 6:4, we remember that there were giants or Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, after the flood, when the sons of God, the Bahai Elohim, came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, who were of old men of renown. These crossbreeds of the fallen angels have been part of the folklore of all civilizations that were scattered after Babel. And that's what we're talking about. That Babylon was after Babylon, with the scatterings of the nations, that all of these men of renown folklores went with all of the various different nations, and they had different folklore, different things that basically probably stories that came from before the flood and after the flood that were changed and, taken off course from what they originally were. And that's where we get this idea. The Bible tells us these men who were old were men of renown. These are the men of renown, and that are tales of the sons of God having offsprings with the daughter of men. Remember, this happened before and after the flood. It tells us in Genesis 6:4. Really, that's where Babylon began, with Nimrod. Nimrod was most likely one of these fallen angel hybrids that took the whole world and tried to bring it under the authority of one leader, with one global leader wanting to offer a alternative to the way of God, to God's redemption plan. They wanted to go a different way. And so we see these things. So these are the tales. We have these tales, and we see evidence of it all over the planet, as I discovered on our trip. But one of the things I learned on my trip to Turkey and Greece was from Brandon Holhouse. Brandon Holhouse did a study on one of the sites that we were at and brought something up that I hadn't recognized before because of a translation issue. And that is a mistranslation of Deuteronomy 32:8. And the New King James Version, which is the version that I use, this is what it says. It says, "When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set their boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel." Very interesting here. And it says that he separated the number to the children of Israel. This is, of course, Moses giving a kind of a synopsis of the journey of Israel to where they were right then. And it's very interesting that he starts from the beginning. He's talking about God and creating everything and creating the people of Israel, but also how he set the boundaries of the people. But in this translation, it says to the number of the children of Israel. The the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are older than any of the other versions of Deuteronomy that we have, it is not Israel, but the actual B'nai Elohim is how they're being divided. The ESV gets it right. So this is connecting Deuteronomy 32:8 back to Genesis 6:4, which I find very interesting. In the ESV, it says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, all the different nations, that happened at Babel. It says when he divided mankind at Babel, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God, or the B'nai Elohim. And of course, Brandon brought up to the point saying that all of the nations had different gods or different demigods or these different fallen angels or B'nai Elohim, Nephilim, that they worshipped. And it's very interesting that we see these things happening. It says, this makes more sense when we think about it in the context of the scriptures, as God is not dividing the nations by the number of the people of Israel, because remember, as God had promised the children of Israel that he would number them as the sand of the seashore, if you could count that, saying that the number of the children of Israel would be, the promise to Abraham would be an innumerable amount of people that would come out of the fruit of Abraham. And we don't see that many nations. So to say that if the original translation was of the children according to the number of the children of Israel, if you'd say the 12 tribes, there'd be only 12 nations. Well, there's more than 12 nations, but there isn't an innumerable amount of nations. So it makes more sense that it would be the way the LXX and the Dead Sea Scroll give us this verse in Deuteronomy 32. Now, but if it is the fallen angels, then we can see some evidence of the gods they worshipped. Now, if it is true, then we would, every one of these nations, all of their folklore, and if you go around the world, they all worship these false gods that are demigods or greater than man gods, or half God, half man, different things. And so remember, we are told later on in Deuteronomy 7, remember Deuteronomy later on in 32 and verse 17, it tells us that they sacrificed, these other nations sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods whom came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. So we know that behind these gods that they worshipped, these sons of God, these B'nai Elohim, are demons or fallen angels. We know there's a difference between them, but in this reference here, referring to the spirit behind the gods of these different nations. And so what do we see? What do we see? I know in my latest trip, some of the ancient nations, I was astounded by the idolatry and the description of these gods as giants. I saw proof of giants all over. And it was kind of amazing. But just to kind of give you a recap of some of the things and show you a couple videos, the first thing that we saw, of course, was the first place that we went was Pergamum. And I saw this. This is the temple to Zeus, or the altar to Zeus, also known as the seat of Satan, or the Satan's throne, could be. This is just the platform for it, because the actual thing that was on top of it is in Berlin, and we've used that in many of our Bible studies, finding it very interesting that was there. But this is the place that it was. And what was Zeus? What was Zeus? Zeus is the sky and thunder god in ancient Greek religion and mythology, who rules as king of the gods on Mount Olympus. His name is cognate with the first syllable of his Roman equivalent Jupiter. So they just changed the names as they go to different world leaders change the names, but it's the same God. Remember, we talked about that in our Whore of Babylon, how she's changed names throughout history, but her name, the spirit behind her is the same. And we see here Zeus, of course, being the king of all gods, but notice he rules as king of the gods on Mount Olympus. And remember, Mount Olympus, of course, is in Greece, and it's very interesting. There are the folklore of the fallen angels coming down on top of the mountain, and that's where, and then the men had given up the daughters of men to these gods that came down on the mountain, and they had offspring, which are the Nephilim. And so Zeus is showing us right here that could be just a perversion of the original story, or some of the stories that might have been from before the flood or after the flood. We're not sure, but Zeus is right there. And then where did we go? In the same spot, a little bit lower from this spot, we see the temple to Athena. And there was a lot of, we went to the Parthenon in Greece, which was the huge thing of Athena. But who is Athena? Athena in ancient Greek, an ancient Greek goddess associated with wisdom, warfare, and handicraft, who was later synchronized with the Roman goddess Minerva. Athena was regarded as the patron and protectress of various cities across Greece, particularly the cities of Athens. Athena's, it's all over Athens, by the way, from which she most likely received her name. The Parthenon on the Acropolis of Athens is dedicated to her. Her major symbols include owls, which we found her. Owls are all over the place. Owl eyes in Turkey and Greece. It all goes back to shamanism and witchcraft and evil. It's all over. I mean, it's incredible. Olive trees, believe it or not. Snakes and the Gorgonian. In art, she is generally depicted wearing a helmet and holding a spear. She is the warrior princess, or the warrior goddess, or also the mother of all gods. Now, we know that Athena and all of this goes back to Babylon. And what was the next thing we saw was Asclepion. Asclepion, of course, you can see the snakes. This was from a hospital where we saw Asclepion, and Asclepion is, of course, where we get our modern medicine from, modern medicine. And also, here's a picture of him with the snake on a staff. And when you look at modern medicine with the two snake heads going up to the top, that does not come from Moses in the Bible. I know a lot of people, a lot of doctors will try to clean it up and say, oh, that's the bronze snake that was lifted up in the wilderness. No, it wasn't. It's Asclepion, and we saw much proof of that where we were there. In Greek mythology and religion, Asclepius was the god of medicine, son of the god Apollo and mortal Chorus. So notice it was the god and a mortal, a god and a lady that had Asclepius. So a Nephilim. And we see it all over the place, you guys. I mean, it's just, I was stalked. I was looking for other stuff to record videos of, and I was astounded how much stuff applied to our Babylon study as I was there. His name was said to mean cut open. It is said that he was so named as a result of his mother's childbirth experience, during which time her womb had to be cut open in order for Asclepius to be born. Also known as a cesarean section. So that's where they got it from, was Asclepius. You see, all of our modern medicine goes back to demon worship. And we wonder, well, what have we seen since 2020? What have we seen in the evil of medicine? And it shouldn't surprise us that it all started from demon worship. It says, in Homer's Iliad, Asclepius was a man, a physician to soldiers wounded on the battlefield at Troy. But by Critics' Day, he had become elevated to the status of God. And so we see that. And also we saw temples to Artemis. We saw several of temples to Artemis. And this is a big temple. You can see that it was rebuilt around it. This was a pretty huge temple that we were at. And Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, nature, vegetation, childbirth, care of children, and chastity. In later times, she was identified with Selene, the personification of the moon. Now notice though that the women goddesses are always with the moon, or the moon goddess. Also, the moon god, Allah, has its root from Artemis. Believe it or not, that Islam is just worshiping another false god of the pantheon of gods that all started from the Tower of Babel. And when Babel was spread, they took their false gods with them. All Muhammad did was take one of them and make it his god, because there was no real, Allah is not the true God, it's a false god. So all it could do was take what was already there and claim it for itself, which was the moon god. And this is the female form of the moon god, was Artemis. But it's very interesting. It says she was often said to roam the forest and mountains, attended to an entourage of nymphs, which were, and the goddess Diana is a Roman equivalent. And of course, the Parthenon of Diana in Corinth, they had these nymphs, or these prostitutes, that would go down into the city, and that was, this is what we see. We see it all the time. And of course, in Greek tradition, Artemis was the daughter of Zeus, and Leto, the twin sister of Apollo. So it's always a god and a demigod, or a god and a mortal, just like we said that the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and these were the men of renown that happened before and after the flood. So we see this all over the place. And what else do we see? We see these giant doorways. Everywhere we went, there was giant doorways. Why would you need giant doorways? Of course, looking back at it, we would say, well, it's because their gods were big. So we had to make big doorways that they're just made up gods. They don't really exist. So, but is it true? Or did they really have, giants that roam the land that were coming in and out of these things? I don't know, but there's giant doorways all over the place. And then we went to Troy. We went to Troy, and there again was this another temple to Athena of Troy, or Helen of Troy. This is again, and this is the altar. We're looking at an altar now where they would burn sacrifices. And I love the guides. They said, oh, they were just animal sacrifices. Were they? Were they really? I beg to differ. I bet there were human sacrifices done on these. And then, of course, we saw Apollo. Apollo was a big one. Now, very interesting, this temple to Apollo, because Apollo was an oracle god. This is where you would go to get, when you wanted to hear from God, right? To get oracles. Apollo is one of the Olympian deities in classical Greek and Roman religion and Greek and Roman mythology. Apollo has been recognized as a god of archery, music and dance, truth and prophecy, healing and diseases, the sun and light, poetry, and more. One of the most important and complex of the Greek gods, he is the son of Zeus and Leto, and the twin brother of Artemis, goddess of the hunt. He is considered to be the most beautiful god and is represented as the ideal of the Kyrios, and he's like a beardless, athletic youth that's supposed to be and Apollo is known in his Greek-influenced Etruscan mythology as Apollo. As the patron deity of Delphi is the place where the Apollo Pythrathos, Apollo is an oracle god, the prophetic deity of the Delphitic oracle, and also the deity of ritual purification. His oracles were often consulted for guidance in various matters. He was in general seen as the god who affords help and wards off evil, and is referred to as Alexakikos, or averter of evil. So we see that these temples were all over the place, and stories of where people would go here to hear from God, to get direction on what they should do. And of course, we know they're talking to demons. That's what they are, fallen angels. And of course, what about, do we see proof of giants on engravings? Everywhere you go, all of their engravings show that the mortals are small, and the gods were giants or Nephilim. Look at this one here. We got a big baby. Phyllis is pointing to that one where you see the person sitting next to this giant baby. We went to this one place in Athens where they had this giant gateway, this big old gateway with these titans. That's what they call them, the titans on top of them. And these were big, giant gateways that went into the agora. And notice they called it the Palace of the Giants. The Palace of the Giants. And so that's pretty crazy. And then this other relief right here, as you can see, the small people on one side and the giants, the giants were right there. They're looking up to these women goddess giants. And then what about this one? See all the mortals coming to appease or to inquire of the big gods. We had this one here. This is Athena. This is actually Aphrodite pursuing a giant. And so we see evidences of these giants and this is just I'm scratching the surface of all of that I saw there, of these folklore, of these men of renown that are all over the place. What about genetic hybrids? We talk about genetic hybrids. What do we see people doing today? It's as if it was in the days of Noah, which was before the flood, where we see these things happening again. We're seeing mankind seeking help, oracles, so to speak, from the demonic realm for information to build the technology that we have today. We see it happening over and over and over again. And then we've told you stories on our prophecy updates of a genetic hybrids. What would we see? What about this one here? We see these half men, half horses all over the place, right? And then what about these griffins that we see? Are these just made up animals that they engraved into stone all over these temples? Or did they actually exist as they were playing around with genetics? We just really don't know. And so, but, you know, a lot of people would ask yourself, how do you know that this all points back to Babylon? How, just because it's just mythology, how do you know people didn't make it up? How do you really know that Deuteronomy 32 is talking about when he divided the nations after the Tower of Babel, that they took their worship of demons or gods with them? Well, I discovered something really important that I discovered proof on this trip that kind of blew my mind on that after the division in Babylon, that the groups that separated took with them what they knew there. Meaning, if we were able to go back and see the first generation of people that went and built a city after Babylon, what would we expect to see? Would we see the same thing that we saw in Babylon? And guess what? We do, because I visited the city of Troy, and Troy is one of the few cities that go all the way down. They've excavated all the way down to the bedrock, and they've discovered the first generation of the first. And of course, they say it's 3,200 years ago, and we'll talk about that. But here's a video I made while I was there, and just watch this now. We are told about the story of the Tower of Babel, and it says in chapter 11, verse 1, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, Come, let us make brick and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar." And we know the rest of the story in our study in Babylon, but what I found very interesting is we're here in Troy. And Troy is one of the most ancient civilizations that they've been able to find, where the layers take us all the way back down to Troy 1, which they say is before the flood. But we know, and they say that because they say the early civilization built with brick because they didn't have iron yet. But we know that the early civilizations, if Noah could build a boat, they had to have tools to be able to do that. So we don't believe in their theory of evolution. But we can see, once God scattered the world and scattered their languages, what would you expect the earliest civilizations to build with? Brick and mortar. And what do we see here? They built, this is from what we know, it'd be probably about 2400 BC after the flood, after the Tower of Babel. The first civilization, when God scattered their languages, came here and built their first city with brick and mortar. So again, we see the Bible becoming real before our very eyes in a place that really doesn't have biblical significance. And I was blown away when I saw this, and I started thinking about it, thinking about our study in Babylon, and look, here we are. Evidence of the scattering of the nations right after Babylon, right here in Troy. So as you can see, right there, we discovered that in Genesis 11:3, where it says they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. I found it very interesting that the first civilization to settle in Troy built with bricks and mortar. As you saw in the video, it is proof that when the nations were separated at the Tower of Babel, they took with them the technology that they were using to build there and built the first civilization with that. But we also can, and so it's not far-fetched to understand that they took their religious beliefs with them. Just as the languages were confused, so were the religious beliefs. That's why we can see different names of the same ideals behind them and the demons that were behind them. Just as we see the building of these civilizations with the same material as in Babylon, we also see that it was the origin of all these false gods or men of renown. The first to start all of this was Nimrod himself. As we see the building back of Babylon, we will see the return of the worship of demigods, or as we know as the worship of the Antichrist. It's very interesting how things will shift from the worship of these stone gods to gods incarnate or demigods that exist in a person at the time. We understand this and know as the worship of the Antichrist. This will come out of what we call the revived Roman Empire. What was unique to the Roman Empire that was different? Then something happened that was unique before the Roman Empire dissolved. It never really broke up. We understand from Daniel 7:23 that the fourth beast, that was this monster that crushed and devoured broke the rocks into pieces. All the nations that we see in the world are left over from the Roman Empire. But what was unique to the Roman Empire that separated itself from the generations before that worshiped false gods? And I found, again, a very interesting thing that happened to us on the trip. And I wanted to, it's another discovery that I made that shows us what's coming with the revived Roman Empire. So here's another video for you to watch. Well, we're here on location in Pergamum on our trip. And this behind us is the temple to Trajan. And it's at the highest place on the mountain, or the Acropolis in Pergamum. And through our teaching, I learned a few things, and I find it very interesting that down below us at the very bottom is the temple to Artemis or Bacchus, and it was the goddess of alcohol and drinking. And then above her, above that temple, was the temple to Zeus, which is the big temple that's in Berlin now. And we had a study there about the forces of darkness and the fallen angels that are behind all of these demonic worship. But we come up to the top, to the most modern temple, and it's a temple dedicated to man worship or emperor worship. And I find it very interesting in the evolution of different worshiping, and as we've been learning a lot on a lot of my podcasts, as this points to what's going to come in the future of the revived Roman Empire, which will again center around man worship, but really devil worship, so that all of the false religions of the time accumulate at the top of this mountain, which I find very interesting. And so we're going to continue to film videos like this, but this has been a very rewarding trip, and we're glad that we can share it with you. So as you can see, I thought it very interesting in Pergamum. The first stop that we made was the evolution of their worship. It started with the lower temple up to the temple of Zeus. Then finally, on top of everything, once the Romans came in and built on top, they built a temple for Trajan. So Trajan was to be worshipped, emperor worship. And so when we're told about in Daniel and other prophecies about the revised Roman Empire, the 10 kings that will come out of what was left over of the east and west division of the Roman Empire, that these 10 kings would arise and that one king would come out of them that would demand to be worshiped. And we understand and know from Scripture that this person will be actually Satan incarnate, as we read in Revelation 13:4. So they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So one of the aspects of the tribulation period will be different than all the other. Well, we can trace all the world religions back to Babylon. We've done that on this podcast. We can show you how all of them started from Babylon and how they branched off. And it's very interesting that they're recognized in Revelation chapter 17 as this woman who is the whore or the mother of all harlotries. And all of these false religions are daughters of this one woman that started in Babylon. But that God will use the Antichrist and the worship of this one Antichrist or the beast, what mankind will ultimately do to judge the woman and the whore and all the world religions. And we're going to talk about that next time. But I just found it very interesting that this review to remind us that there's proof of these things as we look at history, as we go and look at the places where these things were written and understand that as the prophets were writing, as Paul was traveling and writing, he was seeing these things before his very eyes. And I think it's very interesting that the one thing that we know that will be different during the tribulation period than that is different now, but was the same back in the time of the Roman Empire with emperor worship, that will be repeated in the tribulation period. I think that gives us, we get back to our verse that started all of this over the last few weeks, and that is Revelation 16:19. Now the great city, Jerusalem, was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So Babylon, they are building back Babylon right before our eyes. We see it happening. We see that soon everything is going to go back and center around a person worship, because the whole world is lacking a leader. Here in America, we're getting ready for our election. It doesn't matter who wins. Either side will not provide with us a sufficient leader to be able to cause this country to function any longer. I think it's on purpose, as all the countries of the world have turned its back on God. The leaders cannot lead, but God is preparing one person through the person of the Antichrist that will bring this world to a close. And we know that's going to happen before we know it. The world is coming back together as one, just like it did in Babylon. It's coming back under the idea of unity of religion, unity of economy, unity of government, and of course, unity under religion. And that is going to happen, you guys, as we see Babylon being built back. And it's very important. So I hope you enjoyed a little bit of our trip and some of the videos we did to help encourage us to understand and know that the Bible is true. And if these things are evident in the world in archaeology, where we can go around and see evidence of the things that the Bible talks about that happened in the past and that are going to happen in the future, then we can know where it talks about Jesus Christ dying for our sins and rising again from the dead is true. And that if we place our faith and trust in that, if we know that the Bible is true, it is an inerrant, infallible word of God, it is telling us about things that have happened, and we can go and see the evidence of it like I've showed you, then we can know that Jesus really did die on a cross for our sins and rise again from the dead. And by placing our faith and trust in him, that we can have eternal life. That is so important for you to understand that you need to get saved before it's too late, because all these things are coming to a head, and the great deception is about to begin as they build back Babylon. So you need to make sure you know what you believe in, and you need to believe in Jesus Christ. You need to put your faith and trust in him today before it's too late. Because I don't even know if this podcast will make it out on the platform before Jesus comes again. But if it does, then that means that God is waiting for you to place your faith and trust in him and get saved, because it might be too late. So for the rest of us, look up, know that our redemption draws near, understand and trust in the things that God has written that we can believe and trust in, and we can rely upon them for our source of truth. So next week, we'll go ahead and pick back up in chapter 17 of Revelation and continue our study through the last two chapters, 17 and 18 and some of 19, before we finish up our study and building back Babylon according to the Bible. So thank you guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time, and Maranatha. If you have been blessed by this podcast, please subscribe and share to help get the word out in these last days. If you'd like more information or to contact us, please go to calvarysolidground.com. God bless you, and see you next time on Apologetics and Prophecy.